This is Miss Boo.
I became homeless 27 days before I met the old man. I lost my job, then my apartment, and eventually ran out of money completely. Every morning felt exactly the same. Wake up cold, pack my things before somebody complained, spend the day looking for work that never seemed to exist, then find somewhere to sleep and do it all again the next day. The old man approached me while I was folding a blanket behind a bus station. He looked harmless enough, neatly dressed, friendly smile, the kind of grandfather people trust immediately. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "Can I ask you a favor?" Normally I would have ignored him, but then he said he'd pay me $100. That got my attention. He pulled out a small white bakery box and told me he needed me to bring it to his wife. When I asked why he couldn't do it himself, he explained that the elevator in his apartment building had been broken for weeks and he couldn't manage the stairs anymore. He still needed to stop by the pension office and didn't want his wife waiting. The story sounded strange, but not impossible. Then he handed me the money before I even agreed. Looking back, that should have been enough to make me walk away. Instead, I took the bill and headed to the address he gave me. The apartment building was old and run down. The elevator really was broken, so I climbed 3 flights of stairs and knocked on the apartment door. Nobody answered. I knocked again, still nothing. The door wasn't locked. I called out and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The living room was neat, the kitchen was empty. A few framed photographs sat face down on a shelf, which struck me as odd, but I didn't think much about it at the time. At the end of the hallway, a bedroom door sat slightly open. When I pushed it wider, I found an elderly woman lying on the floor beside the bed. At first, I thought she had fallen. I rushed over and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened instantly. Not like someone waking up, like someone who had been awake the entire time. She stared at me for several seconds before her gaze shifted to the bakery box in my hand. "Did he send you?" she asked. Her voice sounded completely normal. I told her yes. For a moment, she closed her eyes and looked exhausted. Then she quietly said, "He promised he wouldn't do this again." Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. I asked what she meant, but she ignored the question and slowly stood up. That's when I noticed the scratches covering the inside of the bedroom door, hundreds of them, deep grooves carved into the wood around the handle and along the frame. The woman couldn't stop staring at the bakery box. I set it on the dresser and immediately noticed her breathing change. She took a step toward it, then another. Her eyes never left the box. "Ma'am?" I said. Finally, she looked up at me. Whatever expression had been on her face before was gone. All I saw now was hunger. Real hunger. The kind you see in an animal that hasn't eaten in weeks. "You should leave," she whispered. Then she glanced back at the box. "If you can still leave, go." I turned toward the hallway. That was my mistake. The second I looked away, she slammed into me hard enough to send both of us crashing into the dresser. The bakery box hit the floor and burst open. There wasn't a donut inside. There was a piece of raw meat wrapped in wax paper. The woman dropped to her knees and grabbed it with both hands, tearing into it like she was starving. She barely chewed. Blood ran down her chin as she swallowed. I stood frozen, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then she slowly raised her head and looked directly at me. "It's not enough," she whispered, and then she lunged. She hit me before I could react. One second she was kneeling on the floor eating that raw meat, and the next she was on top of me. We crashed into the nightstand hard enough to send a lamp flying across the room. I got my arms up just in time to stop her from reaching my face. Up close, she smelled like spoiled meat and something sour I can't really describe. Her teeth looked completely normal. Her hands looked normal too. If you'd seen her sitting on a park bench, you would have thought she was somebody's grandmother, but there was nothing normal about the strength she had. I shoved her away and stumbled into the hallway. My only thought was getting out of the apartment. I didn't care about the $100 anymore. I didn't care about anything except reaching the front door. I made it halfway there before she grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me off my feet. I hit the floor hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. Then she climbed on top of me and tried to force my arm toward her mouth. That's when I finally understood what the old man had paid me for. The money wasn't for delivering food. I was the food. Somehow I managed to kick her hard enough to throw her off balance. I scrambled backward into the living room while she followed me on all fours. I know how insane that sounds, but that's exactly what happened. She wasn't moving like a person anymore. My hand closed around the first thing I could reach, a heavy ceramic vase sitting beside the television. When she lunged again, I swung it as hard as I could. The vase shattered against the side of her head. She collapsed immediately. Everything went silent. I stood there shaking, staring at her body on the floor. For a moment, I thought maybe she would get back up. She didn't. And the worst part was that now, lying there motionless, she just looked like an old woman again. Gray hair, wrinkled hands, slippers, a faded blue sweater. Nothing about her looked dangerous anymore. Then I heard the front door unlock. Someone stepped into the apartment. "Evelyn?" A man's voice called out. "I'm home." My stomach dropped. It was the old man. I ducked behind the sofa and listened. "Evelyn?" He called again. Then he laughed softly. "You must have scared him this time too." Every bit of fear I felt turned into anger. He knew exactly what she was. He knew exactly what was going to happen when I walked through that door. He hadn't hired me to help his wife. He delivered me to her. The old man walked down the hallway. A few seconds later, I heard him stop. Then I heard something I wasn't expecting. He started crying. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. I stepped out from behind the sofa and followed the sound. He was kneeling beside Evelyn's body with one hand resting on her hair. His shoulders were shaking. For a moment, he looked like a man who had just lost the love of his life. Then he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. "What did you do?" he whispered. I couldn't believe he was asking me that. Before he could stand up, I grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen and hit him across the side of the head. He dropped instantly. When he woke up, he was tied to a chair in the kitchen. I used extension cords, bed sheets, anything I could find. He stared at me for a long time before finally speaking. "You should have run," he said quietly. I asked him how many people he'd brought there. At first, he refused to answer. Then he looked down at the floor. "7, he said. After a pause, he added, "Maybe 8, like he'd lost count. Like they didn't matter enough to remember." I asked him what happened to Evelyn. I expected some crazy explanation, some curse, some disease, some secret. Instead, he just shook his head. "I don't know." I thought he was lying. He wasn't. "One day she stopped eating normal food," he said. "Then she stopped recognizing people. Then she stopped leaving the bedroom." His eyes filled with tears. "But every now and then she'd remember me. For a few minutes she'd know my name again. I kept thinking if I could keep her fed long enough, she'd come back. And for the first time since I'd met him, I wasn't looking at a monster. I was looking at a man who had spent years lying to himself because he couldn't let go of the person he loved." Eventually I stood up and walked toward the front door. Walter immediately started begging. First, he asked me not to leave him tied up. Then he begged me to call the police. Then he started promising money, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I ignored every word. Before leaving, I locked the bedroom door from the outside and slipped the key into my pocket. Maybe that sounds cruel. Maybe it was. But after what I'd seen, I wasn't taking any chances. I walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the street. The afternoon sunlight felt wrong somehow. Too normal. People were walking dogs. Cars were passing. A kid rode by on a bicycle. Nobody had any idea what was sitting inside that apartment building. I made it halfway down the block before realizing I was still carrying the white bakery box. For a second, I almost threw it into the nearest trash can. Instead, I opened it. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe? Shock? Some part of me still trying to understand what had happened. The wax paper was stained dark with blood. Underneath it was a folded photograph. I pulled it out. It showed Walter and Evelyn standing beside a lake somewhere, smiling at the camera. They looked happy, completely ordinary. The kind of photo millions of couples have sitting in frames around their homes. I turned it over. There was writing on the back, faded handwriting, just one sentence. "If she starts asking for meat, don't let her see this picture. It only makes her hungry." I read it 3 times before the meaning finally hit me. Somebody else had been there before Walter. Somebody else had known exactly what was happening. Somebody had left him a warning. And judging by everything I'd seen, he hadn't listened. I wish I could tell you I called the police. I didn't. I wish I could tell you I reported the apartment, or went back later, or did something brave. I didn't do any of that either. I walked away. That's the truth. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I just wanted the whole thing out of my life. A week later, I found a job washing dishes at a diner across town. 2 months later, I rented a tiny apartment. Life slowly started feeling normal again. At least, that's what I told myself. Then one night, almost 6 months after everything happened, I came home and found a white bakery box sitting outside my apartment door. No address label, no note, just the box. My stomach dropped the second I saw it. I stood there staring at it for nearly a minute before finally forcing myself closer. There was something written on the lid. 3 words. "She remembers me." I don't know who left it. I don't know if Walter somehow got free. I don't know if he ever left that apartment. I don't know if Evelyn is dead. What I do know is that I moved out the next day. I left half my furniture behind and didn't even bother getting my security deposit back. Sometimes I still think about that photograph, about Walter sitting beside the woman he loved, smiling like everything was normal. And sometimes I wonder what would be worse, losing the person you love or watching them disappear little by little and convincing yourself they're still in there somewhere. Because if I'm being honest, that's the part that scares me the most. Not Evelyn, not the apartment, not even the box that showed up outside my door. It's the fact that if I'd loved somebody long enough, maybe I would have done exactly what Walter did. Maybe after enough years, enough memories, enough hope, I would have started bringing people home too. And that's the thought that still keeps me awake at night.
If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one might be even worse.